Welcome to the Pick Six Podcast NFL Draft Show version. It's our weekly look into the old draft world, mock draft world for now, soon to be real draft world. We are one step closer to getting the old final 32 picks set in order here as we get through the playoffs. Joining me as always, Josh Edwards, Chris Trapasso. Before we get going here, don't forget about old YouTube. YouTube.com/pick6. You can like, you can comment, you subscribe, get notifications for every time we go live. And that will be certainly the case after every playoff game and Super Bowl. And I'm sure we'll do some live stuff over the course of the offseason with free agency and ultimately the old draft there. If you're listening on Spotify, don't forget to leave a 5-star rating. It would make Will Brinson very happy. And at the end of the day, that's all we really want to do. All right, let's get to it. We're talking Malik Willis today off the top. And if you watched last week's pod or listened to it, you know that Chris Trapasso is a huge Malik Willis guy. And I'm going to poke a little fun at you to start, then I'll let you take the floor, Traps. Malik Willis, ranked higher or lower than Mason Rudolph?
Probably grade-wise similarly, but I will say in my defense, I feel like I'm like the Braveheart gif where the guy pulls out his sword where everyone's running at him. That's kind of how it was for me with Mason Rudolph in 2018. I feel like that's how it's going to be with Malik Willis. What I will say is,
hold on, Chris, before you get going, this has been a wound reopened for me because now Mason Rudolph has to be the starter for my craptastic Steelers team as Josh Edwards smiles on knowingly. So
yeah,
hopefully...
I was just seeing that Mason Rudolph was trending on Twitter, and I was wondering why. And there's were they doing exit interviews today? And he was talking about, this is my chance to become the next starter in this storied franchise's history. And I immediately thought of myself and being wrong on that evaluation. And then you guys and Ryan, to potentially have Mason Rudolph as the week 1 starter. It probably doesn't feel the best after 15 years of Big Ben.
I saw him trending, Chris, and I hope he had been traded to the Browns, but alas, no such luck. All right, go ahead with Malik Willis.
I was saying that I learned from Mason Rudolph, and that I liked Mason Rudolph because he was a pocket-only passer, tried to get through his reads. I kind of scoffed at the idea that, hey, he doesn't have a big arm. But look, Tom Brady doesn't have a big arm. Drew Brees doesn't have a big arm. Late career Peyton Manning was not throwing 50-yard bombs all over the field. As long as you're processing quickly, can get through your reads, you can be a good quarterback. And, of course, right after Mason Rudolph is drafted, Patrick Mahomes starts for the Chiefs, throws 50 touchdowns, throwing it all over the lot. Then there's Josh Allen, there's Deshaun Watson. Now we have Justin Herbert, and to a lesser extent, in terms of physical skill set, Joe Burrow really dominating the NFL at the quarterback spot. And I realized you kind of need to have a strong arm, especially in today's NFL. The improvisation
Mac Jones
ability
is the exception. Go ahead.
Mac Jones might be the exception. That you need to have that arm. And I think anyone watching the NFL, you don't need me, a draft analyst, to tell you that that's the way that the quarterback position is trending. And the one thing I will say, and this can maybe lead to a bigger conversation on what you guys think, I don't think Malik Willis is that inaccurate. I think his game against Ole Miss, he threw some interceptions, but in those games where Liberty was facing, competition that was around its level in terms of offensive and defensive line, secondaries with receivers, he was throwing a lot of accurate passes in stride down the field at the intermediate level. I think he got hit with the raw inaccurate label a little bit too early because of that Ole Miss game where he threw a bunch of interceptions. But I think if he gets a decent group around him, like he had at Liberty when they were playing in conference, he can be that next quarterback with the big arm and the improvisation ability that you want to pick in the first round.
So, Traps, before I ask Josh this, give me your top. We'll do 6 quarterbacks. That seems to be the consensus. Who are your top 6?
My top 6, let me get my thing right here. I have Malik Willis at 1, Kenny Pickett at 2, Desmond Ridder at 3, Matt Corral 4, Sam Howell 5, and Bailey Zappi 6.
Okay. All right, Josh, let's start with your top 6, and then you can tell us how you feel about Malik Willis, where he fits in this pecking order of quarterbacks.
Yeah, so for me, it starts with Matt Corral, and then it goes to Kenny Pickett. You've got, obviously, Malik Willis up there for me as well. I'm probably in the middle of you two in terms of where I have Willis slated. And then I have, well, let's see. Next, it would have been Jay Kaner had he came into this draft class. But then you're talking about the group with Sam Howell, Carson Strong, and Desmond Ridder, who I've been a little bit lower on than some others in this class. But
and Traps didn't have Carson Strong in his top 6.
I did not. So
and
we're gonna see an eye on this, Ryan.
Yeah, I can understand that as well. The concern I have with Malik Willis, and this was kind of a talking point on Twitter recently, is that his sack rate on dropbacks, I think, was 13.1% or something absurd like that. Now, if you're looking at the perceived top 7 quarterbacks this year, Sam Howell's the next closest at 12.1%. The other 5 quarterbacks are at 6.6% or less. As I reflect on last season, these numbers were a little bit different than what I had seen mentioned elsewhere, but in a relative ballpark, Justin Fields was 9.4%, which was a relatively big outlier considering or compared to the rest of the class, because everybody else was at 4.5% or lower.
And Justin Herbert did not play great his senior season at Oregon.
Yeah. So, when you're talking about that level of discrepancy between 13.1% and Trevor Lawrence at 4.5% last year, that's a huge difference. I mean, you're talking about a quarterback that is holding on to the ball a little bit too long. And maybe that's because he feels like he doesn't have the talent to compete against some of the teams that he's had on the schedule this year. But you also have to wonder if his processing is lagging behind a little bit as well, which has to be a concern as he moves to the next level.
So a couple things, and I'm glad that we have different lists here because I think that's important. So we're not all group thinking. Our guy Pete Prisco always talks about the Twitter cult, and he's exactly right. Like if you stare at something too long, no matter if it's NFL draft or whatever, you start to believe it. So that's good. And we'll get pushback, and as we all know, and as Streps knows, especially with the Mason Rudolph stuff, people can actually hate you over who you like and don't like. So whatever. I don't care.
They never praise you, though. They never praise you. It's always the ones you get wrong.
That's why I always keep tweeting out that me talking about Mac Jones thing from last February. Until he gets cut or something, you'll be seeing that a lot on my timeline. But hey, like Dave Chappelle says, Twitter ain't real, so it doesn't matter. So here's my thing with, I'll give you my list first. So Matt Corral first, Kenny Pickett, and then Willis. Carson Strong's 4, and I don't know, Traps, if your issue with Carson Strong is the knee related or just something else. But the knee's
mobility,
Yeah, and he does not have it. I mean, I was watching some games the other day just to refresh my memory, and he looked like slow man's Mac Jones back there, and that's not a compliment. 5, I have Sam Howell, then I have Desmond Ridder 6. And for me, like honestly, and I've said this before, Matt Corral is the only first-round grade that I have. But the thing about Malik Willis is, and we talk about it all the time on this show, and if you've seen him play, it sort of jumps out at you, is that when you sort of build a quarterback in the lab, other than his height, and I think he's 6'1", 6'2", we'll see how tall he really is when he gets to the Senior Bowl, he's exactly what you want. He's built sturdy. He's built like Russ Wilson. He has a great arm like Russ Wilson. He runs better than Russ did, although Russ ran more than he does now for sure. But I think I'm with Josh on what's he seeing and not seeing? That you mentioned the Ole Miss game where he did not play well. I was watching the Louisiana Lafayette game. I'm halfway through that. And the very first play of the game, there's two guys running wide open on the right side and in the middle of the field. And he goes off those reads, and those appear to be his first reads, and goes left and then has to scramble. And I remember talking to Scott about this. He said the issue with Malik is that man coverage, he'll eat you up. But if you give him any sort of zone looks, that's when he takes that half second to sort of process what's going on, and he may miss these open guys. That can be fixed. I mean, that's not the end of the world, but we have to go on what we see. And right now, he's not a first-round guy for me, but that doesn't mean he will not go in the first round. In fact, I think I've had him going in my mock drafts in the first round for the last month or so, maybe even longer. And I know certainly Traps has because he likes him the best. And look, there is no Cinderella in this draft class. It's all a bunch of you're trying to figure out, what can I live with? What can we work with? And so on and so forth. So I'm not a huge Malik Willis guy. I hope he has fantastic success, but based on what I've seen, it hasn't popped. I will say this, however, I went back and checked over the summer. I watched him. I had like a mid to late day 3 grade on him. So he's gotten a lot better. And that's also the conversation that you have to keep in mind, because I think when people get mad at you on social media or whatever, fans specifically, is that they're taking a snapshot of the player that they saw throw 5 touchdowns in one game, and they get angry at you about all the other stuff, the projections and all that. So how high, Traps, do you think Malik can go?
I think he could go somewhere in the top 10. I think there's enough teams that need a quarterback, although this season might be stranger than ever with, potentially Aaron Rodgers being on the market, Russell Wilson. That could change a lot of things. Deshaun Watson, that maybe we get to even early April and like none of those teams need a quarterback that early. I just think he has top 10 tools. And if you are talking about Kenny Pickett, who I like, Matt Corral, not as much, but I could see him going in the first round. I just don't think they have first round caliber traits. And that in watching the first and second year quarterbacks, I did a grading series every week at cbssports.com on Tuesdays. And I noticed with guys like Tua Tagovailoa, with Jalen Hurts, and to a certain degree, Mac Jones, like offensive coordinators in today's NFL, they can scheme production. You can throw tunnel screens, bubble screens. The RPO game has really infiltrated the NFL. Jalen Hurts had a bunch of games this season for Philadelphia, and I think he took a step forward where the Eagles offense didn't really ask him to do that much. He was getting the ball out in a hurry, drag routes to open receivers, easy throws into the flat. It was the quarterbacks like Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow in that study that were certainly getting those easy throws, the play action bootlegs out wide, throw into the flat to the tight end. But they were really moving the needle and making those big throws to either win games for their teams or keep them in games where their defense wasn't holding up their end of the bargain by making those ridiculous throws 15 plus yards down the field on the run where they're eluding a defender. I think Kenny Pickett flashed that a little bit. Matt Corral made plays here and there doing that. But I think every game from Malik Willis, I saw at least 3 or 4 of those big-time throws. Yes, it was against lesser competition. The corners weren't nearly as fast as what they're going to be in the NFL. But I kind of liken it to, and maybe it just comes from watching Josh Allen. Josh Allen, draft stock, and I was not a fan of Josh Allen, took a big hit. They played Iowa and Oregon. Wyoming did in that 2017 season. Josh Allen got sacked a bunch. He threw a pick 6. He just looked completely overwhelmed, trying to do too much. Those are the same vibes that I got from Malik Willis against Ole Miss. When you watch him against Middle Tennessee State, Troy, whatever it may be, even Syracuse, he looked like he belonged. So I think if I'm searching for a quarterback in round 1, I'm not at this point hoping for like high-ish floor but low ceiling. I want to be able to compete with the Justin Herberts and the Josh Allens and the Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, I was at that Syracuse game, and I thought he held his own. He wasn't the reason they lost that football game for sure. They have one guy on that team, and his name's Malik Willis. Josh, let me ask you this. I've typically had Malik going anywhere from like the 11 to 20-ish range, and that's just me speculating. But let me ask you, Traps mentioned Jalen Hurts. If Jalen Hurts were coming out in this draft class, where would he rank? Would he rank ahead of Malik Willis for you, below, around that range?
He would probably rank below just because I think Willis has a higher ceiling. I think Philadelphia did a lot to take, the game out of his hands in a little bit this season. I think if you asked Devontae Smith about that passing offense, he would probably have some frustrations that he would voice privately because there were some throws left on the field that Hurts simply did not make. And as Trapp said, he progressed over the course of the season, but he's not to the point where you feel comfortable stating with certainty that this is your franchise quarterback moving forward. So as we look at this quarterback class, I don't have a first round grade on any of them right now. Some of them are going to go in the first round. That's just the nature of the beast. Quarterback needs, drive players up the board, and they're ultimately going to be taken in the first round. But I think Hurts belongs in that same bucket of players in terms of, they could have something here, but they're not somebody that I feel confident in saying is going to be a Joe Burrow or, to a lesser extent, Justin Herbert. We all had our concerns when he was coming out of the draft, but you obviously saw the amount of talent and potential that he had at the position.
All right, Josh, I'll stay with you for this one, and I'll go to Traps. What's the best case scenario landing spot for Malik Willis? I joked, only half jokingly, that it was the Browns in terms of the infrastructure they have there. I think Baker's coming back, and I think Baker's obviously better than Malik Willis as we sit here. But is there an organization like that where, as opposed to throwing him on the Lions, for example, actually the Texans is probably a better example of a worse team. What's the best case scenario for a guy who needs a year, maybe even a little more than a year, to grow into that role?
Yeah, I think I don't think the Browns are a good fit for Willis, but I think Willis is a good fit for the Browns because with that running game,
Right.
they would be able to bring him along slowly and be able to use his feet a little bit more naturally. Now, I think, in terms of the realistic options, you're probably looking at New Orleans and Sean Payton as a guy that just simply understands the quarterback position and how to get the most out of it. So as I'm looking at, ideal fits for these individual players, New Orleans has to be up there for Malik Willis just because I have so much confidence in Sean Payton and what he's able to do at that position, because I think he is able to make things easier at the quarterback position for a quarterback to come along at his own pace and kind of develop some of the traits that are lagging behind as he comes into the NFL.
And almost as important is that they have an offensive line. Like, you can mock draft Malik Willis to Pittsburgh all day long. He's going to get murdered back there unless he can also block before he has to throw passes. Traps, what's a good landing spot? I think the Saints is number one on my list if we're excluding the Browns for both comical and obvious reasons.
I would love the Falcons for Malik Willis, even if we're thinking that Matt Ryan is going to be the quarterback next season, which based on his contract probably will be the case. It would kind of be, and I'm going back to the Josh Allen comparison, it would kind of be like when Josh Allen over the past couple of years, not in 2021, but had Matt Barkley as his backup. And he said that he learned so much about the game from Matt Barkley, even with him as the second stringer, and that Matt Barkley, showed Josh Allen how to throw with anticipation, how to read coverages. I think to learn from Matt Ryan for a season, just literally in the quarterback room and in practice of how, not saying that Matt Ryan has a Matt Barkley-esque skill set, but he's more of a precision passer that throws with anticipation, not going to run around a ton. I think that would work wonders for Malik Willis to say, hey, you're not going to be the starter. You have an entrenched guy that's been, this franchise's starting quarterback for over a decade now. He's in front of you. Learn from him. Take some of his nuances to rein in some of the over-aggression. And then in 2023, with Kyle Pitts entering his third season, hopefully a rebuilt offensive line a little bit, maybe some more weapons at receiver if Calvin Ridley is gone. Then you let Malik Willis take over where he's kind of fine-tuned some of the rough edges of his game.
Yeah, I mentioned the Lions earlier as not a great landing spot, but I actually take that back. I was thinking the Texans, and I was looking at the top of the draft board. The Lions may not be terrible. Their offensive line isn't bad. Jared Goff's going to play another year. I feel like that organization is going in the right direction, and that might be one of the rare cases where you can add a franchise quarterback to a team that hasn't won a lot of football games recently, and it has a chance to work out down the road. It ain't going to work out next year, almost certainly, but that's something to consider. Like the Broncos on some level, but I don't know what's going on with the head coach there, and I think Drew Lock's time is done, but obviously if they're in the running for Aaron Rodgers, that would be a different conversation. So, all right, Malik Willis. That's our little scouting report on him. I'm sure we'll go through these other quarterbacks as we get through this process here. But let's turn to the teams who most recently lost in the playoffs and are now officially locked into their draft positions. 19th are the Eagles, and Traps, I'll start with you. I had him taking Roger McCreary. It was one of three defenders I had him taken in the mock draft. The other one was Trevon Walker and Nakobe Dean, I believe, either Nakobe Dean or Devin Lloyd, one of the linebackers there. Devin Lloyd, thank you, Debo. So I have him circling back with Roger McCreary here, who, when I talk about this, he's not the most athletic cornerback in this draft class. He's not the most physically imposing, but he is the most consistent. He is typically where he needs to be. He's typically making plays, and he plays in the SEC against really good talent, and that's something that's easier to sort of translate to the next level. What do you think the Eagles should do here, Traps, at 19?
Well, it would obviously depend on what they do at 15 and 16 with those back-to-back picks. But if they do go corner, which we're probably assuming they will, I would love Roger McCreary in Philadelphia. If we're talking about fits, that's a defense that likes to play a lot of zone. They have their man coverage guy if they need it in Darius Slay. But Roger McCreary, 5 interceptions, 20 pass breakups the past 2 years in the SEC, including 14 in 2021. And even going back to 2019, he had 9 pass breakups, and he first popped on my radar in that 2019 game against LSU. He was making some plays on the football, covering Jamar Chase down the field as a sophomore. So I think, again, you're spot on, Ryan, that he's not going to test like the classic first-round cornerback. But if a team wants to, rush 4 and play cover 2 and cover 4 behind that pass rush, Roger McCreary would fit in perfectly in Philadelphia, especially if some of the other big-name corners are already off the board.
So, Josh, the Steelers got the doors blown off in that Chiefs game. Luckily for the rest of the AFC North, Matt Canada appears to be coming back, the offensive coordinator, so that's great news for you. I mean, I've never seen a team score so few points in the first 3 quarters, and the head coach gives the OC a high five, but here we are. Offensive line was terrible. Big Ben's leaving, it looks like. I saw Mel Kiper's mock draft came out on Wednesday, and it had Matt Corral, I believe, going 20 to the Steelers, which I was legitimately excited that he might be there. But Kenyon Green, Texas A&M, could play guard or tackle. What are your thoughts on that? And would you have any trepidation if Matt Corral had in fact fallen to the Steelers?
Well, I think we can agree those are probably the 2 biggest needs for Pittsburgh to address this offseason, which is the quarterback position as well as the offensive line. If the quarterback is there and you have a conviction about that player, then I think you have to take the quarterback. If you don't, then maybe you're able to address the position elsewhere, whether it's free agency or through a trade. But as it stands, Kenyon Green is a player that I love. I think we've kind of forgotten about how good he can be as an interior player because there was the whole experiment trying to move him to offensive tackle, and then they moved him back to guard. I think once you see him settle into his role as an interior offensive lineman, that's where Green is at his best. And I think he can play at a very high level in the NFL. So I'm perfectly fine with him going here. I think it's good value. And you're talking about a guy that does have the versatility to play tackle if you find yourself in a pinch.
And you know what? I'll circle back to you, Josh, because I know you're a guy here. I'm going 21 to the Patriots, who also got their doors blown off at the hands of Traps' Bills there. And it was, that was one of the most thorough beatings I saw, not just over the weekend, but ever. So, Josh, you love George Karlaftis out of Purdue. Who knows if he lasts at 21? You like him a lot more than Traps and I do, so he could be a top 10 guy. But in terms of the fit, I always sort of compare him to a stronger version of A.J. Epinesa, sort of what we wanted A.J. to be coming out. And I think Karlaftis provides some of those attributes. I don't know if he's going to be a better player than A.J., but 21 to the Patriots, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's a good fit, not only for the player, but for the team, because what New England asks from their defensive linemen is to be able to take on blockers, be able to control your run gaps, be accountable, be responsible. And that's exactly what George Karlaftis is. He's a player that is going to fight through those double teams. He's going to fight through those chips. Just a very mature player that is capable of using his hands to get off blocks and make plays in the backfield. So I think, he may not be as flashy as some of these defensive ends that we've seen in the past with Myles Garrett, the Bosa's, Chase Young, but I think this is a player that is definitely going to find success in the NFL. And as long as you are able to get impact players out of the draft, I think you take that every day. That's the end goal at the end of the day, because there are so many general managers that, will take players that simply do not work out. And that's ultimately what gets them, into the unemployment line. So George Karlaftis is a guy I think that New England can be confident taking, and I think he's a great fit for that culture.
Traps, what do you think about Karlaftis? I mentioned A.J. Epinesa. What's your comp for him if you have one? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that the more athletic A.J. Epinesa is a really good one. In that Epinesa, and I've certainly watched a ton of him up here in Buffalo, that he's kind of this big power player, can play inside, outside, like 275. I feel like that's what George Karlaftis is going to ultimately weigh in at. Early on, I think our first episode here, Josh told us how much he liked Karlaftis. So I went back to watch him, and I messaged Josh after. I'm like, you know what? I watched more of him, and I do like him a lot. I think Josh likes him the most of all three of us, but he's that rare type in that he's high floor, but I think he actually has a pretty high ceiling too. He's really young. He's only 21 years old. So this is not someone that is already a finished product. And I think in New England, with Bill Belichick playing kind of a versatile role that really Bill Belichick has for a lot of his defensive players, I think George Karlaftis can be really good, not only just right away and be a solid contributor as a rookie, but by year 2 and year 3, be a really nice compliment to Matthew Judon, who will be 30 at the start of next season.
So Travis, go ahead.
Karlaftis is a former top-rated high school recruit as well. So this is not, some flash in the pan. It's not like he just now burst onto the scene. This is a guy that has been highly regarded by evaluators, dating back to his high school days.
Yeah, in his first year at Purdue, he was just unstoppable.
Very good, yeah.
Last year, COVID year, he was hurt. Doesn't count. And he was good this year as well, for sure. So, Traps, I'll say with you at 22, the Raiders, they lost that close game, Whistlegate, if you will, to the Bengals. The dumbest.
That was
I
bad.
mean,
I didn't think the whistle was that early. Unless I was hearing like a doctored video on Twitter, it seemed like it was clearly after the catch. And it seemed like whoever that Raiders corner was just kind of giving up because he was beat, not because of the whistle.
Trevon Merrick.
I was shocked by like all the backlash that got.
Trevon Merrick in coverage, and best case scenario for the Raiders, it happened maybe a millisecond before Tyler Boyd caught the pass. And here's my thing, and Raiders fans were yelling at me about this because I said basically this on the Pick Six podcast, that I don't know the rules. The rules say, well, I mean, here's the thing. You're going to overturn that because your team is terrible in coverage because that old man blew the whistle because he didn't know how to blow a whistle properly. Get out of here. All right. Anyway, the Raiders, they're now picking 22. I'm thinking Kyrie Elam. He feels like a Raiders height, weight, speed guy. I actually like him a lot. He won't tackle in the run game, and that's sort of a concern. But if he's solely in there on passing downs, he's really, really good. What are your thoughts, Traps, on Elam?
Well, first off, the Raiders have to pick a corner. If not in the first round, it's got to be in round 2. They have Brandon Faison, Desmond Trufant, and Casey Hayward in their secondary. And Casey Hayward's still a good player. Had that interception of Justin Herbert in the season finale. That was a big play. But when you have Desmond Trufant still playing in your secondary considerable snaps, you need to look for an outside corner. Nate Hobbs, the 5th-round rookie out of Illinois, played really well in his rookie season, but you need a perimeter player, and that's certainly Kyrie Elam. I like him a lot too. I think I get a little nervous when there's these 6'2", 210-pound corners in today's NFL that is dominated by these elite separators. But I think at like 6'2", 210, whatever he may be, Kyrie Elam, he's really fluid as an athlete, and I'm little concerned about his tackling. But in today's NFL, at corner, if you can make plays on the football with decent regularity, and he certainly has a large catch radius to break up the football or intercept passes. I think you can be a quality player, most valuable player in the secondary that you're going to get the most value out of your coverage ability. And Kyrie Elam proved that he is an elite cover guy in his past couple seasons at Florida in the SEC.
Real quick, here's why I like this fit probably a little bit more today than I will in a month. Because currently Gus Bradley is still the defensive coordinator, and we know his past with the Seattle Seahawks, coveting those bigger defensive backs. So that's a great fit with Las Vegas.
Yep. No, that's right. Those guys were huge. And what was the safety's name? The Legion of Boom, the guy who Cam Chancellor. Cam Chancellor was built like a defensive tackle. Like literally the Bengals could use him to play defensive tackle right now and make that team better since they're short up front. All right, Josh, let's stay with you on the Cardinals here. And this is a complete overreaction based on what I saw and didn't see and that demolishment at the hands of the Rams there. When Dre Hopkins went out, it felt like that offense took a turn. That could just be coincidence because apparently Cliff Kingsbury is terrible in the second half of seasons. He's 9-20 after week 7, the last 3 seasons combined. And, that's not great, even for bad football teams, but this is a pretty good football team. What do you think about Chris Olave here? They have Christian Kirk, who's not in number 1. AJ Green is clearly over the hill. I love Rondale Moore, but again, you can't rely on him to be your primary target. And with Dre Hopkins out, I feel like the worst case scenario, Chris Olave gives you another legit option.
Yeah, to your point on Moore, a guy that they took in the second round last year, he was used primarily at or behind the line of scrimmage. And that's exactly how he was used at Purdue as well. So I don't know if he's capable of doing more. I know his trainers think he's capable of doing more, but we haven't seen that to this point. So to add a guy like Chris Olave, who I think is going to be consistent and draw eyes from Dre Hopkins, be that red. I mean, he's been fantastic in the red zone for Ohio State in recent years. I don't think people realize just how dominant he has been when you get down into the money-making area. He's been fantastic. So if you pair him with Dre Hopkins and then you've got Rondale Moore to be that complementary piece, I think that's a group that you feel really confident in moving forward if you're Arizona.
What do you think, Traps?
I would love it. I think the one area that's not being talked about enough for Chris Olave, and Josh kind of hinted at it, he's really good tracking the football. Like he got kind of pegged as this, super sharp route runner playing at Ohio State, where we've seen, Terry McLaurin and KJ Hill and Paris Campbell, these fast, really twitchy, great route runners come out of that program of late. But there are so many awesome tracking of the football plays from Chris Olave. Not necessarily high points where he's Mike Evans leaping over a cornerback, but he will find the football if it's in his vicinity. And I think Kyler Murray, being one of the more aggressive downfield passers in the NFL, that offense likes to stretch it vertically. I think Olave's probably not crazy fast, but I think he could fall into this area where he's just fast enough. The ball tracking skills and his separation ability will still lead him to going in the first round. It would be an awesome fit and exactly what the Cardinals need.
Does he track the ball better than Micah Hyde?
Not quite.
That was the best. That was the best no-look interception I've ever seen in my life.
So I was there with my dad, and we have front row seats in the upper deck. My dad's had them since like 1979, and I don't think it was my dad. It was the guy next to him said, "Oh, that's a touchdown," and I'm watching. And I have a great view. I'm super grateful for those seats. I thought it was a touchdown too. Like I was baffled when I saw Micah Hyde come out of nowhere and not only get there and maybe break it up, but like literally take the ball off of Nelson Aguilar's helmet. I've never seen that before.
It's one of those things, and these are the things you think about when you're a middle-aged man and your athleticism left you long ago. But sometimes I think, like, what if I had like a pause button and I could as a 48-year-old, I could compete like in professional sports. And if I were Micah Hyde, how many times would I have to hit, back up 15 seconds to make that play? And I would still be out there hitting the back up 15 seconds button because it literally came out of nowhere. Debo's creeping to the 24th pick, so we can get out of here. I see you, Debo. All right, finally, 24 Cowboys. The worst loss of the weekend, perhaps of the season. Oh my God. Trent McDuffie I have going here, and Josh, I'll start with you. Honestly, I love Dax Hill better in this spot. Trent McDuffie plays primarily outside of Washington, but I think he has the versatility and the physical toughness to kick inside if you want him to. And I think Dax Hill can already do that. But either way, what do you think about adding a secondary member here? Because typically I would have someone like Devin Lloyd. I love him going here with Micah, but he's off the board. So what do you think about McDuffie?
Kind of depends what they think about Kelvin Joseph, the guy they took in the second round last year, because he played sparingly this year. When he was on the field, he didn't look too bad. So I wonder if maybe he takes on a larger role next year, because otherwise – you're potentially talking about kicking Trevon Diggs out, which is, when you're on social media, that's a very hot topic you probably want to steer clear of. But Trent McDuffie is actually a guy that I was watching today. They play a lot of zone in that Washington secondary, but I think McDuffie's best traits is to be able to stay in phase up the boundary. I like him better as that man cover corner rather than playing downhill. So I think, he'd be a great fit for the Cowboys if you're trying to play him on the boundary. And maybe that allows Trevon Diggs to, move inside a little bit and be able to make those plays downhill, which is where he, seems to be at his best, making plays on the football. So it would certainly be an interesting collection of cornerbacks for Dallas. And I'd be very interested to see how it's sorted out. But Dax Hill is a guy that has tremendous versatility too. So I don't think you can go wrong either way.
What do you think, Traps?
See, I think Trent McDuffie can also play inside. I know he mostly was on the perimeter at Washington, but I think he's twitchy enough to be that slot defender if you need him to. And I know earlier in the season in Dallas, Anthony Brown kind of got victimized down the field. The Cowboys are kind of in a weird spot that you kind of like Jerry Jones hinted at it after the game. You look at the roster and you're like, they should definitely have won that game. Like there's not a clear hole in the secondary. Even the linebacker spot now with Micah Parsons moving to edge rusher, they picked Jabril Cox in the 4th or 5th round last year. He can cover a little bit. Leighton Vander Esch on the last year of his deal could be linebacker, but you're right. If Devin Lloyd's off the board, I wouldn't hate this team to go either corner or maybe wide receiver, because they're probably going to lose Michael Gallup. He was in the final year of his contract, tears the ACL late. They could use another wide receiver. I mean, Dak Prescott had kind of a stinker against that 49ers defense. Maybe someone up front. It's not really a team that has a bunch of needs, but this might really be, at this late 24 overall, be a best player available. And that very well could be Trent McDuffie at that point.
Yeah, so we'll find out a few more names to the finalization list of the draft order this weekend. But for now, that's a wrap on the old Pick Six Podcast NFL mock draft version. We'll see you guys next week.